So, we were just kind of joking, not joking, about how, complicated it is to like upload multiple videos, etc. And Bianca noted that, this is not anywhere near as hard as it is to actually get an abortion in, Georgia or many other states. And mentioned, the fact that there's one abortion clinic in all of the state. And what are they called again?
In Missouri, there's, you probably heard about it, there's the Planned Parenthood of St. Louis, which is the only abortion provider in the entire state. And I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks ago where their medical license was not being renewed because they weren't abiding by the laws that are in the state, which regulate abortion facilities, but also attempt to criminalize abortion providers. Mm-hmm. And so right now they have like an extension and they are able to see patients, but if their medical license is revoked, they can't even perform STI testing or HIV testing, not just not providing abortions. And I shared with Patty that, in that state where there's one abortion clinic, there's probably like over 10 crisis pregnancy centers. And those are facilities that are not regulated, that are all over the United States. And they offer misinformation about abortion, if any information about abortion. And they definitely attempt to prey on people who are working class, people who are poor, people who have a reading level lower than a particular like 9th grade reading level. And they also are very much right next to or across the street from abortion clinics, because they want to divert people away from going into a clinic to receive options counseling about other options. Those crisis pregnancy centers exist, and there's twice as many crisis pregnancy centers in the United States compared to actual abortion facilities in the U.S. And they are all over the country. So here in California, there are many. And one of the representatives here in California attempted to create a law about the reproductive rights law. I forget what the exact title is, but it basically said that these crisis pregnancy centers must provide 2 sentences somewhere posted in their facility that says California state offers medical access and coverage for people seeking an abortion or other reproductive health care at free to no cost. And it was overturned by the Supreme Court last year. So even attempts to regulate the misinformation that people have about crisis pregnancy centers are being stopped. And it wasn't even about abortion. Those laws were stopped because of freedom of speech, which was the argument made, where crisis pregnancy centers were like, we think it's a violation that we have to use our walls to advocate for abortion. And it's not even advocating for abortion as much as it's saying, look, if you're poor and you need help making decisions, Medi-Cal is available, and this facility will not offer you all that information. So those crisis pregnancy centers do receive federal dollars. Federal dollars do not go to fund abortion in any state. That's what the Hyde Amendment allows, is for no abortion to be covered by federal dollars. So in the state of California, the state has decided that they will put money into funding abortion procedures through Medi-Cal, but it is not federal funds. So these states that have more progressive opportunities for people to get access to quality care, those aren't really going to change necessarily. But what we do need to be is more critical of what crisis pregnancy centers are and what they do. So they prey on certain people. They also give them the illusion that they will be supported if they carry their pregnancy to term and parent. And they also require that people get a sonogram, that they look at the sonogram, and sometimes even are required to hear the heartbeat through the sonogram. And, to be straight up with you, like I said, 90% of the abortions that occur in the U.S. are in the first trimester. And all scientists, not all of them, but a majority of scientists agree that this idea of fetal pain does not occur until well into the 3rd trimester, which is after 24 weeks. And even though that brain and heart is beginning to emerge in the fetus, there is no connectivity between any of them. They're just organs that are there existing and growing. They don't actually result in the fetus being able to be assessed as whether or not this will be someone who is going to be harmed, or whether this fetus is experiencing a great experience in the womb. Like, it doesn't necessarily tell us, oh, this is what life looks like. Instead, it's like, here's how it develops. And so that's, I think, something that's really important for people who think these myths about abortion exist. they're actually just misinformation where people misinterpret the data and the scientific information. There's one leading doctor that supports all that, which if you find this person's name, it's the last name's Anand, you can just recognize that that person is just anti-abortion and attempting to misinform people using scientific language. And that's who the abortion providers cite often. They often cite the Guttmacher Institute, which is a think tank that focuses on reproductive health. And what they choose to do, though, is misunderstand what the findings are of abortion in particular states. So they will cite quality research, but they will not interpret it properly. And these are some of the things that we need to be mindful of as people currently in this stage of media and what's going on online and how people are talking about access to care, especially abortion services.
How can people identify what is a rape or not a rape? What is a pregnancy crisis center versus a,
So crisis pregnancy centers will usually always offer free pregnancy tests. And, just FYI, if you go to the dollar store and get yourself a pregnancy test, it works just as well as the $20 one at the name brand pharmacy. So they're just looking for a hormone in your urine. And if you're far enough along, if you are pregnant, it will show up. But if you're if it's 2 days and you're like, oh my gosh, I think I might have been exposed to some semen, it might not pick it up. It has nothing to do with it's a dollar store brand. But they will offer people a free pregnancy test. They will offer people free sonograms, free options counseling. A lot of them also have these whack names, like the Floral Women's Center of Life, right? So those are like a marketing ploy to get people to think, oh, wow, they're really supporting my choice. And I'm struggling and I'm kind of on the fence about what to do. But they definitely know that if it sounds like a douche commercial or the title of a company that wants you to douche, it probably is a crisis pregnancy center. Some of them actually are called crisis pregnancy center.
Well, and they're giving away free sonograms. That's kind
expensive. That's a whole
there's
piece of equipment
there.
Training. And the reality is that people at crisis pregnancy centers do not need to be licensed to use a sonogram or to read a sonogram. So they're offering things that they have people who are completely unknowledgeable about how to use that equipment because there again is no type of regulation.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really frightening. Just how many people would go there and actually get potentially into crises, just from carrying a zygote to a fetus to a baby when in fact that could be harmful for them for whatever reason. Like I'm thinking specifically of if someone has an ectopic pregnancy and God, could you imagine
that's painful.
Yeah.
And I mean that's the thing, there are laws that require abortion clinics and providers to be within a certain distance of a hospital or to be required to do sonograms. First trimester procedures do not require sonograms. They are so incredibly safe. People do not need to have a sonogram to see how far along they are. And so these are examples of how there are attempts by states to make it difficult for abortion facilities to even exist. So if you're not within 10 miles of a hospital, they're not going to approve your medical license. And that also connects to other systems, right? So what happens if you're a facility that needs a landlord because you can't afford to build your own building on some land?
Right.
That impacts landlords and whether or not they want to allow an abortion provider to be on their land or to lease to providers. There's also connection. I mean, first of all, physicians usually come with their own connections to hospitals. So that's also a moot requirement attempted to put fear into people. There's also, all sorts of laws and languages that are shifting. And I had mentioned in one of the earlier videos wanting to talk a little bit about that. What we're seeing now when language is shifting, especially when talking about late term procedures, which are procedures that are in the third trimester, so over 24 weeks. Those are, first of all, less than 1% of all abortions that are done in the United States. And yet these are the abortions that anti-choice and anti-abortion folks are focusing on. And it isn't really something that happens all the time, but they're using it and calling it partial birth abortion. We're also now seeing language about babies born alive. And this is legislation that is being used to talk about people who have decided that their child is experiencing some type of anomaly, that either the child is in pain, or it will die once it's born, or it will harm the life of the person carrying as well as the life of the child. And I use the term child in this scenario because at the third trimester, it is known that a fetus can live outside of the womb. And oftentimes third trimester procedures are chosen by people who wanted to parent and who definitely have a connection to their child. And they're devastated by the reality that their child is evolving without a brain, or that their child has a hole in their heart, or that a child will just never be able to live past the third day. And the trauma of what that can do to the body, not only to the spirit and the mind and physically, is drastic. And so this language of babies born alive focuses on people who don't know anything about the body or anything about science. And it's the idea that, if this, so usually what happens in third trimester procedures is cell division is stopped through an injection of the fetus, and so the fetus stops growing, and then labor is induced. And so what ends up happening is the person does give birth to a stillborn child. And these laws and legislations are things such as, if there's involuntary muscle movement when the stillborn has been birthed, the doctor must do everything in their power to make sure that the child receives 100% quality care if they can be saved and, resurrected, if it will. And so for many people who are probably hospice workers or, death doulas, they know that the body does a variety of things, even when it's not necessarily quote unquote alive. And so these are the ways that people are attempting to undermine choices that people make, to criminalize not only parents that are traumatized and mourning and grieving, and usually who choose that option because they want to hold their child, they want to bury their child, they want to have a ceremony with their child, and they're being targeted, and their trauma is being used and pimped out by anti-abortion communities that know nothing about that trauma. So you'll be hearing that language.
It's criminalizing the providers in a way too, or putting them at least under legal obligations that kind of don't make sense.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And what we'll also see, and which we see in other parts of the colonies that the United States has power over, there's 5 of them: Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, American Samoa, and the Northern Mariana Islands. There's certain laws and statutes that say if you help someone get an abortion, you are also down to be arrested and put on trial as a criminal. And so, there's laws like that all across the world. But to know that this is happening in some of the colonies of the United States also gives us an understanding of what violence looks like, and how some things just are not being decolonized. Even though many of us love to use that word. What does decolonial work really look like?
And oftentimes, like the U.S. colonies are the places where kind of experiments happen before they get brought onto into the 50 states. And I can imagine that that law it's already being attempted or been attempted.
Absolutely. I mean, there's lots of things that rub up against our own personal ethics and values, and that we don't ever really want to talk about. Puerto Rico, which is where my family's from, pharmaceutical companies set up shop all the time there because they have a different constitution and they don't have to follow the strict laws that are here in other states in the United States. And so they go set up in Puerto Rico, which is a colony. And, if anybody remembers when Hurricane Irma and Maria hit, there was maybe like a week or 2 where people couldn't access pharmaceuticals that they needed, or there was a waiting period and people were really upset and they didn't know why. It's because Puerto Rico, homies, if it wipes out a laboratory, if it wipes out the labor, that means that you can't get your tubes for your whatever. That means you can't get your lancets or whatever it looks like. And I think for a lot of us who are on medication, who take medication, we sometimes ignore that reality of how colonization impacts the way that we are benefiting from it so that we can acquire and receive medication. I think about it all the time when I take my pills and, and it's complicated and it's wildly not discussed for a variety of reasons. And it's a very similar thing. And we have to keep in mind how climate change is shifting access to reproductive health care. There were 5 abortion clinics in the U.S. Virgin Islands before those hurricanes. There aren't that many now. There's maybe 4 in the entire island of Puerto Rico when there used to be significantly more than that. But also we're seeing a shift of doctors leaving those countries and coming into the U.S. because there just is no work. And so as that shift begins to happen because of climate change and environmental factors, people also lose access to quality medical care because they don't have access to people who can offer them any kind of care.
Right.
So,
and just when the conditions of living are harder, then there ends up being a brain drain, so to speak.
Absolutely. And in traumatic times, people do need touch, and people do end up having sex. And if you do not have contraceptives or barrier methods, pregnancies can occur. And that's one of the ways that sexuality is such a natural part of our lives for many of us. And some of us choose to act in certain ways on it to express ourselves. And also many of us choose to be sexually active in a consensual way when we're experiencing trauma, just to feel alive again.
I mean, so sexuality is healing,
Absolutely.
And of course people are wanting to heal from trauma using our bodies. And it is, it's all of it like touches up and brushes up against, every other kind of component of being human, because when we think about restricting abortion access, I mean, we're actually talking about restricting access to basic health care, and this health care touches up against all of everything that it means to be human. I mean, because if we have a body, it's going to change. Like we're not like born at 25 and die at 25 and a half. Like we're born as little beings that need attention and oftentimes intervention, and we go through all kind of changes, and eventually as we transition, we're going to go through more. And so like at some point we're going to brush into the healthcare system. And I'm just I'm my jaw still is kind of dropping at this looking more and more like a nightmare in the U.S. And it's been a nightmare in so many ways for so many communities already, and including many of mine. And I just I didn't expect us to be so quickly rolled back, in terms of our kind of basic health rights.
Yeah, and if you are someone who's watching and you do decide that you need access to quality care, you might live outside the United States where it's not legal. There is a website, Women on the Web, which was a spin-off, if that's the right word, or a branch of Women on Waves, which was a boat that doctors had, I believe it was licensed from the Danish, and they would pick women up and then take them out, or pregnant people up, and then take them out into international waters, provide them with a medication abortion, which is misoprostol, mifepristone, which can be taken orally. And what those do is they stop the cell division of the fetus and they induce a miscarriage. They will ship to you those pills if you need them. And their website, Sin's team will put in the comments. But you do need to be 10 weeks pregnant or less. And they do ask you about 25 questions to assess how you think you are pregnant and what access is available for you. So there are international resources for people who do want to have that type of medication abortion. And there are also abortion procedures such as a manual vacuum aspirator procedure, which does not require electricity. It's portable. It's quick and fast to use. And I encourage all my people who have the capacity to be around blood to try to find someone to train you on how to use a manual vacuum aspirator machine, because that's one of the ways that you too can support people in your community who might need abortions moving forward in the future. I will say that first trimester abortion procedures are incredibly safe, and they, when done correctly and by someone who has been trained to do them, they are not as painful as people might think, and they are actually a very quick procedure of about 10 minutes only. So, abortion, it is a medical procedure. It is a part of healthcare, and the reality is that many of us in our communities know how to do this, can offer abortion care, and we can also access it. We need to keep in mind that homeopathic options were available, and those still might work for some people, and other parts of the world still use them, as well as midwives know how to support people who are pregnant and don't want to be. So it might look like us going back to some of the older ways that our ancestors existed and accessed quality care, and it doesn't look like going to a doctor. And for some people, especially some Crips, that might feel really great and relieving. Yeah.
So, that brings me to a question around, disabled folks that are trying to access healthcare and abortion access. I mean, it seems, I don't know, for me, just trying to access like basic gynecological care has been drama. Like not accessible tables, trying to get an MRI in a chair. I know some people in the room can attest how difficult it is because, they like, I don't even know what the fuck. There's like a giant magnet, and so they're afraid of anybody that actually sits in metal. I don't understand. So, just, I'm wondering though, how would it happen in a state where somebody, is pregnant and doesn't want to, carry, the whole situation forward, and there's no way to prove that it would be, bad for your body. You just know that it would be bad for your body. Then, I mean, would there be any way to argue that in a state where abortion is currently illegal?
Right. So I think, in all the states of the U.S., abortion is still legal because of Roe v. Wade. I think that in parts of the world where it's not legal, usually what, for example, women on the web would do is partner you with a physician who they've screened and identify as someone who has prescription writing capabilities that can then offer the medication to people. So that's why they do like an online screening form. And probably someone with a disability are usually more in the know of their body than other people, right? Like I like to put people with disabilities up there with Serena Williams. She knew she had a blood clot and doctors didn't listen to her post her pregnancy, and people with disabilities know their bodies at a significantly similar level. So trusting ourselves to know what's best, and we know our bodies best. And so even if we have a history of people poking and prodding and violating our bodies, we also know what that feels like. And we also can say, this is not what's going to work for me. And maybe a child is going to make me feel like I did when I was in this particular situation. And that's not something I want to experience. There's so many reasons why people make choices. And we have to respect them because people are making some of the hardest decisions of their lives right now because the world is on fire. And, there's urgency for us to value body liberation and to really act on what that looks like and supporting people and finding a liberatory way of living their lives in the bodies that they have. And that takes all of us doing the work and supporting each other too.
But, I mean, I thought that even though abortion, nationally, like abortion is still legal, states are effectively making abortion, illegal.
Right.
So how would one leave the state? Would one...
Yeah, so a lot of that is happening. Yeah, so people who, for example, in Missouri or even like South Carolina, they travel outside their state if they're over 12 weeks pregnant or if they can't access an appointment in time. One of the things that people don't realize is once you exit the first trimester, abortion procedures begin to go up by at least $100 for every week. So as the pregnancy grows, so does the amount of fees assigned with having that procedure. So that's something to keep in mind. And for people who are traveling out of state, they might have to get a hotel room. That also includes transportation, food, and abortion procedures after the first trimester are 2 days or 3 days long. And that's because you need time to have the cervix dilate, and that dilation occurs overnight. So it can be a 2-day procedure. It can also be a 4-day procedure for people who live in a state or are going to a state where there's a law of waiting periods. So waiting period laws look like options counseling or the belief that people need to receive options counseling.
And that's once you can get an appointment, even, right?
Right.
Just trying to get an appointment
Right.
can be like a 2-week period, right?
Exactly. Some clinics allow you to take a phone call and they'll talk to you about it, or you can do a recording. You might have to go to the clinic and pick up some material. You don't have to read it. You don't necessarily have to listen or pay full attention. But these are some of the ways that if you're going out of state and you have to go one day to get your waiting period law out of the way, that's one day that you have to take off work. If you're in the second trimester, those are 2 days that you must take off. That's 3 days of missing out on money, especially if you might need to recover or heal.
Right, and then there's the travel days you have, and then trying to get an appointment. I mean,
right. It's expensive, and it becomes expensive, and this is how systemic oppression works, to encourage people not to choose abortions, because it does become so life-shifting that it's almost impossible for some people.
So, yes, thank you. So, we may see you again with responses to questions, or we may not, depending upon if there are questions, or if there are questions we can answer remotely, we might choose to do that. But Bianca, I'm really glad to initiate this conversation, and I really am hopeful that there's enough movement happening where this conversation doesn't have to expand at the expense of our communities. Although I really am excited that the conversation expand to include more access to more healthcare services for all of us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Patty.
All right. Thank you, beautiful. I'll talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.